Okay, so before I start, I just want to say very, very quickly, thank you so much to Josh for inviting me and for accommodating my request to present virtually. I'm really excited and very grateful to be here. So the title of my presentation is The Theology of Regenerative Grazing. And basically what I'll be doing is providing a kind of conceptual background to the idea of regenerative grazing and the very idea of regeneration itself. So as we all know, regenerative grazing has become extremely popular as an idea and a practice in North America. In Canada, the United States, is very popular in Australia as well. And there are a number of businesses, very high-profile businesses that have adopted regenerative grazing and regenerative agriculture as part of their business models. These are just some of them: A&W, McDonald's, Burger King, Walmart. Walmart is an interesting case because they are claiming that by 2040 they will be a regenerative company. I'm not sure exactly what that means. They give you some idea here. There's no kind of rigorous criteria for being a regenerative company. In my view, there is something really kind of powerful and appealing behind the idea of regeneration that has made it so adoptable by these businesses. I think in some respects it's the new pink ribbon, right? It's the new kind of hot corporate social responsibility gimmick that a number of businesses are jumping onto. So the question that I want to ask is, why has the public imagination been so taken by regenerative grazing specifically, and then regeneration more broadly? And what I want to do here is to parse through three different concepts, one being regenerative grazing, another being regenerative agriculture, and then a third being regeneration. So regenerative grazing is often attributed to this man whom we all know, Alan Savory, about whom Spencer will be talking in more detail after me. So he, as you know, has a very popular TED Talk that he delivered in 2014, in which he claimed rather audaciously that we can reverse climate change to pre-industrial levels with grass-fed beef. Now, in his book, Holistic Management, he doesn't actually use the phrase regenerative grazing. He calls his model holistic management, but he does say at one point, I don't have the quote here, but he does say at one point in a couple places that his model is part of the broader regenerative agriculture movement. So that idea precedes Alan Savory. The idea of regenerative grazing was slapped onto his model by the Rodale Institute. And they're the ones who give us the idea of regenerative agriculture. They're a very interesting nonprofit, a very interesting agricultural organization in the United States, founded sometime in the 1950s by Jerome Rodale, who was the pioneer in the United States of the organic food movement. He had some very, very strange beliefs about vaccines, about Black people, and about living an organic life and being an organic person and having an organic lifestyle. There's a very good book about this if you want to read about it, called The Organic Prophet by Andrew Case, the historian Andrew Case, basically arguing that or showing that what Rodale had introduced was the idea of green consumerism, the way that we can solve our planet's problems by making better, choices at the grocery store, that kind of thing. His son, Robert Rodale, is an equally important figure because he's the one who introduced the idea of regenerative agriculture. And you can actually pinpoint the precise documents where he introduces this idea. So he has this one piece in the Bulletin of Science and Technology Society that he published in 1987, asking, are there any new big ideas today? Are big ideas possible? big ideas on a very grand historical scale, on the order of Darwinism, Marxism, psychoanalysis, Kuhnian paradigms, existentialism, structuralism. This isn't a very logical list, but it gives you an idea of the kind of scale of big ideas that he was going for, right? And he says in this piece that the idea that I want to introduce is the idea of regeneration, something that I've been working on for 7 years. And he makes it clear that this concept of regeneration is not the biological concept, where like a gecko lizard can, regenerate its tail. He says, my conception of regeneration begins with the observation that all living systems have to respond constructively to disturbance. This is not a biological concept. It's not even technically an ecological concept. It's not a systems theoretical concept. This is just a kind of amateur intellectual who was introducing the idea of regeneration. He has another piece called Learning to Think Regeneratively, where he's building on his father's idea of an organic agriculture and an organic way of life to introduce a regenerative way of life. And he really had in mind a kind of total social philosophy that would not just entail agriculture, but that would include regenerative medicine, for example, regenerative politics, just an entire regenerative social philosophy. So regeneration for Robert Rodale, again, was not a biological concept. It was an ideological concept, at the core of which was this theme of a kind of wholesale spiritual transformation. So the question is, where did he even get this idea from? Where did he get the idea of regeneration? And it turns out that he had a connection with the Church of God in the United States, which is run by their CEO and president is this guy, David Hume. And they have a magazine called Vision Magazine, which had an article about Robert Rodale, in which they said that he had learned a great deal from his father and discovered for himself that there are truths about the environment that lead to harmony, balance, integration, and wholeness. But it wasn't just about improving land. It was also about individual growth. That he had taken his father's idea of the organic person and organic, way of life and sort of developed it into 2.0, being the regenerative person and the regenerative way of life. His son, Anthony, had said that his father, towards the end of his life, had entered a spiritual phase where many of these practices and principles that he was obsessed with had, it turns out, a spiritual connection, even though he himself wasn't, nominally religious. Okay, so it turns out that this idea of regeneration, if you do a history of it, it turns out that it originates in the New Testament. You find it mentioned in Matthew. You find it in Titus. The original concept in Greek is palingenesis, and this means regeneration, rebirth. The idea being that, when you accept Christ as Lord and Savior, that this will lead to a rebirth, a regeneration of your soul. And this has been a very kind of important concept in Christian theology for the last 2,000 years. But it becomes especially important in modern Protestant Christianity. There's what we all know as born again theology. So in the 18th and 19th centuries, there were a number of important books written about regeneration. This one, The Grounds and Reasons of Christian Regeneration, The Christian Doctrine of Regeneration, The New Life, a study of regeneration, social regeneration, the work of Christianity. And then it turns out that for the Church of God, for David Hume, for Vision Magazine, regeneration was and is a very important concept. And it's in all likelihood that this is where Robert Rodale got the idea of regeneration. So regeneration is very much, again, not a biological concept. It's ideological. It's a salvific idea. And it has within it this salvation narrative. I think that for this reason, it is not entirely surprising that we should see regenerative grazing or the regenerative grazing idea had become so popular in farming communities in the United States, Canada, and Australia, where, as this article points out, that there is this sort of link between church and state, right? The idea that we are stewards of God's earth. And by farming, we are really carrying out a holy act and doing the Lord's work on earth and pleasing God by raising animals. This kind of ethos is embodied in the form of Joel Salatin, who was another very big figure within the grass-fed beef movement. He's on the one hand very kind of adamant that we can renew the earth and renew the soil through rotational grazing. He's also a very kind of devout Christian who will justify all of this through a Christian frame. So the point that I want to make here is that there is a very kind of clear logical parallel between Christian theology on the one hand and then regenerative grazing on the other. In the first case, the idea is achieving individual salvation through Christ. You accept Christ as Lord and Savior, and you will be given everlasting life. There's a similar idea in the regenerative grazing model. You accept grass-fed beef, and then we will have everlasting ecological peace and harmony on the earth. Okay, so I think in this respect, there is a parallel between regenerative grazing and conspiracy theory. I do not think that it is sufficient simply to, counter the dogma of regenerative grazing with, science and facts and so forth. That's not going to be good enough because it won't work for the same reason that it won't work against conspiracy theory or anti-vaccine disinformation. It's not simply a question of a misunderstanding of science. There's something deeper going on here. They subscribe to a very powerful story. So I want to conclude with a line from the literary critic Barbara Hardy, who says, "We dream in narrative, daydream in narrative, remember, anticipate, hope, despair, believe, doubt, plan, revise, criticize, gossip, construct, learn, hate, and love by narrative. In order really to live, we make up stories about ourselves and others and about the personal as well as the social past and future." And I think this is the kind of primary task if we want to counter the regenerative grazing movement and its misinformation. We have to ask, what alternative story can we tell that is, yes, grounded in the science, that is empirically accurate, but that also can tell an inspiring story about a different ecological future. That's my little spiel. Thank you.